Happy Tuesday, April 23rd. Today we're going to be talking about Leviticus 23, and it's about feasts. As a big guy, I approve. So, the first one is obviously the Sabbath. Seventh day of the week. 6 days you work, the seventh day there's no work, because 6 days God created the world, the seventh day he rested. As some people say, he started exercising dominion over creation on the seventh day. There's no creation. And these are all holy convocations to honor and glorify God. No work was to be done on any of these. So no Sabbath days. First one would obviously be Passover. When you look at when the Israelites left Egypt, they kind of painted blood on the door frames. The angel of death passed over them, and that was the 14th day of the first month at twilight. Their days started the night before, kind of how we start at midnight and go till midnight. They started at sundown to sundown. That was the day. So the 14th day at twilight is Passover. The 15th day of the same month is the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So 7 days after that, they would have presenting food offerings for those 7 days to God, and no ordinary work was to be done. The Feast of First Fruits was next. That was when you go into the land of Canaan, and reap its harvest, you will bring a sheaf of the first fruits to your harvest to the priest. He will wave that sheaf before the Lord so that they would be accepted. When you wave the sheaf, you also offer a male lamb, a year old without blemish, as a burnt offering to the Lord, and a grain offering with it, 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil. Remember, no leaven, no honey, because that would be corruption. That stuff was a food offering to God with a pleasing aroma, a drink offering, which would be wine, 1/4 of a hin. Neither eat bread nor grain parched or fresh until the same day, until you have brought that Feast of First Fruits. Next was the Feast of Weeks. You would count 7 full weeks from the day after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering. So 50 days after that 7th Sabbath. Then you would present a grain offering of new grain to God. From your dwelling place you would take 2 loaves of bread made with 2/10 of an ephah, fine flour baked with leaven, as first fruits to Yahweh. And then you would present the bread 7. Okay, and you shall present with the bread 7 lambs a year old without blemish, 1 bull from the herd, and 2 rams. It would be a burnt offering to God with their grain offering and their drink offerings, a food offering with a pleasing aroma to the Lord. 1 male goat for a sin offering, 2 male lambs a year old as a sacrifice of peace offerings. The priest would wave them with the bread of the first fruits as a wave offering before God with 2 lambs. No ordinary work was to be done. And God continues to say, you're not reaping right up to your edge, nor shall you glean after you harvest. That was for the poor and for the strangers living among them. Next was the Feast of Trumpets. In the 7th month, the first day of the month, you observe a solemn rest, a memorial proclaimed with the blast of trumpets. No ordinary work. Present a food offering to God. Next was the Day of Atonement. This was 10th day of the 7th month. It would be afflicting yourselves. That was fasting and praying and presenting a food offering to God. No ordinary work. That was when the high priest would make atonement for the sins of himself and the people of Israel. Lastly was the Feast of Booths. So the 15th day of the 7th month, for 7 days is the Feast of Booths. So they had week-long festivals, which is pretty awesome. Still pretty solemn. You got to make sure you're doing things the right way, but pretty awesome. The 8th day you hold a holy convocation, present a food offering to God. No ordinary work. You would proclaim this as a time of holy convocation, presenting food offerings, burnt offerings, grain offerings, sacrifices, drink offerings, each on the proper day. Besides Sabbath and your gifts, all your vow offerings, and beside all your free will offerings which you gave to God. So these were kind of the minimum, and then you gave your free will offerings and your vow offerings on top of that. On the 15th day of the 7th month, after those 5 days was complete, you gathered in the produce of the land. You'd celebrate the feast of the Lord for 7 days. And this is why it's the Feast of Booths, because it keeps going. You would take the first day, the fruit of the splendid trees, branches of palm trees, boughs of leafy trees, willows of the brook, and rejoice with God for 7 days. Celebrate it as a feast for 7 days in the year. All native Israelites would dwell in booths, kind of to signify when he brought them out of the land of Egypt. So these were the feasts with the sacrifices. Some would be offered per household. Some would be offered kind of out of a herd that they would have for sacrifices. But this was, to help keep them separate, to keep them holy, to keep them remembering God throughout the year. You might think, wow, that's a lot of sacrifices. God's really greedy, or what? I don't know. But these are done for holiness. These are done for remembrance. And if God is jealous, he is. If God's greedy, he wants our praise. He wants our love. Maybe greedy is not the right word for that, but some of the other deities that the people in Canaan were worshiping didn't want fruits, didn't want their crops. They sacrificed babies. They conquered and all kinds of terrible things. So God wanted them to be holy. God wanted them to remember how he got them out of Egypt and how he got them to the land of the promised land. Throughout the year, it would probably be a good idea today. Not obligated, we're not under the law, but it'd probably be a good idea to have something like this throughout the year where you fast, where you're praying, or you're just more solemn, and you're thinking more about God. So come up with your own plan for that. How do you want to honor God? How do you want to bring glory to God? How do you want to remember what God's done in your life? Because I do think remembering plays a part in whether or not we give in to hope or despair. Are we joyful, or are we grumpy for what we don't have? So let's remember that this week. Let's try to have a good week remembering what God has given us. Have a good day.